God, we must provide that type of spiritual fortification for our homes. And there are times when your wives and your children are going to get angry with you. You got to decide, are you going to be God's man or not? You got to decide whether you're going to say with Joshua, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. You got to decide whether or not you're going to be the military strategist in your house, providing the vision and the strategic plan that your family might fulfill the will of God for your family. And wives and children, you got to decide whether or not you're going to trust that God can work through your husband, as flawed and as marred as he is, with all of his problems, with all of his hang-ups. If he's a man who loves the Lord, he's still God's man. And God still chooses the weak things and the base things and the apparently insignificant things to bring to nothing the things that are. And God still chooses his choice servants to provide the protection that families and the churches need in these times in which we live. And that's what Joshua's role. And Joshua made a strategic error, and he let his guard down, and he allowed the Gibeonites to come into the camp, and they entered into an unholy alliance with the Gibeonites. Now they are bound by that covenant. They are bound by the agreement that they made with the Gibeonites. And so we pick up the narrative in chapter 10. But we're still going to see how God superintends all the affairs that involves his people. And even though Joshua takes a wrong turn, even though Joshua makes a strategic error, a strategic mistake, because he was still God's man, still after God's heart, still designed to do God's will, God still worked to accomplish his will. Pick up the narrative at verse 1. It says, and it came to pass, when Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had taken Ai. Now the king of Jerusalem, don't forget that, the king of Jerusalem, he heard about the armies of God. And he had heard how Joshua had taken Ai. And Ai was a pretty strong city, even though it was small. And the Gibeonites were a stronger and more fortified city than Ai. And the king of Jerusalem heard that the Gibeonites had entered into an alliance with the Jews. And he knew that that would allow Joshua and the Israelis to have now a stronghold, a beachhead in Canaan. And it would be difficult now to rout them out. And so what he does is he calls on 4 other kings. And they confederate together. And they enter into an alliance together. And they say, we must impede the progress of the people of God. Now, some of you get upset when you see people coalescing to fight against you. That's a natural human response, to get someone emotional when people appear to be coming together to fight against you. But that in and of itself is not necessarily all bad, as we will see in this text. If you believe God, if you trust God, if you believe that God superintends, that God's hand controls all affairs, you do not have to stoop down to unholy tactics to deal with your enemies. Just because people are allying and coming together, that's not necessarily all bad, as we will see. So Adonizedek, he allied the other kings together. The Gibeonites heard about it, so they called Joshua. And they dispatched a messenger to go and to tell Joshua that they were in serious trouble. Now Joshua could have said, you're on your own, fellas. That's not my fight. That's your battle. What Joshua saw was an opportunity. First of all, he was bound by his own word. He had made a covenant with the Gibeonites. So he was bound by that covenant. So if they were in trouble, even though he did not necessarily want to fight this battle at this time, he was bound by his word to provide them with some assistance. But more than that, Joshua saw a strategic opportunity. He saw a strategic opportunity in the allying of the armies in and around Jerusalem together. Now follow me. All of those cities in Jerusalem, all of those cities there, they had their own armies and their own governments. And so what Joshua faced was having to fight all of these little battles and skirmishes against a fortified people. But when Adonizedek called the armies together to come up against the Gibeonites, they would all take their choice fighting soldiers, and they would take them away from their city. And then they were going to attack the Gibeonites out in the plain. As I told you before, the Jews preferred to fight out in the open because they were quick and they were agile. And they felt like they had the advantage when they were out in the open plain rather than going up against a fortified city. So what Joshua saw when he saw the kings in and around Jerusalem coming together to leave their respective cities to go to fight against Gibeon, Joshua saw that as an opportunity to take them on out in the open plain. He saw it as a strategic opportunity to land a decisive blow that would weaken the enemies, and so then when he went to their respective cities, they'd be much weaker than what they were if they were all fortified in their own little place. He saw the opportunity. He saw the opportunity. As the old cliches, if there's a glass that is half full of water, it all depends on your perspective. Is it half full or is it half empty? Joshua saw this coalescing of the enemies as the glass being half full. Joshua saw them coming together, leaving their respective cities where there'd be a weaker foe out in the plains as an opportunity for him to move in with one fell swoop and to deal a decisive blow that would weaken all of the cities and that would make them easy prey when he went against each one of them individually. And what we see here about Joshua and what we see here that makes him so effective is that he was a man of integrity. He was a man of integrity. And if there's one thing that we need in the church and in our homes and in our society, it is men and women of integrity, men and women of wholeness, of soundness, of consistency. And Joshua was an effective leader because he was consistent. He was viewed as a person of integrity, and even when he made a mistake in judgment that came from his head and not from his heart, it did not render him ineffective in leading the people. Can I talk to you for a while? You better be careful about compromising your integrity for anybody, under any circumstances, in any situation. Because once you compromise your integrity at one point, it then comes into question everywhere else. And we can look at that nationally and we can look at that locally. Now, you know that I stay away from those political things when it comes to the pulpit. I got my opinion. You ask me in private, I'll tell you. But we see right now in our own country, we have a man in the White House that may be the most intelligent president we've ever had, if not the most, one of the most intelligent. But it's rendered almost ineffective in leading the country because his integrity has came into question. And so once that comes into question, and once you not have the power of persuasion through your own words, through the sheer force of your character and your integrity, then you no longer will effectively lead anybody but people whose heads are empty. And once you compromise your integrity, it's like taking a pin to a balloon. It only takes one. It only takes one pin to burst a humongous balloon. Are you following me? Guard your own personal integrity, because it's your personal integrity that gives you stature. Joshua had stature. He had stature among his own people. And he established stature with the Gibeonites because of his personal integrity. He had stature. He had stature before men and before women, as we see in this text. And when you have stature and when you have influence, then you will have respect. You don't have to beg for it, to plead for it, to be a bully to try to get it. You will automatically get it because people have to deal with people of integrity. They have to take them seriously.